I made a deal with a strange old man in my town when I was a kid and still regret it. I was like 13 when it happened. I was your typical shy, socially awkward kind of kid. This obviously made me a good target of bullying. I had been getting bullied by not only my classmates, but most people. This went on for years without end. I lived in a rural village. We have a lot of superstitious beliefs due to this. It was the beginning of my school year. I was getting bullied and harassed again by, let's say, Tom and his group of friends, including David and Jack. It was pretty much an everyday thing for me. And this time, among all the times they have bullied me, was among the worst. They broke my pencil and pens outside of the school and beat me up. I had told my parents about it and had talked to teachers and even the headmaster, and the school didn't do anything about it. The worst they did was take Tom and his group of friends to the office and lecture them. I cried a lot that day. And the rage I felt was indescribable, to say the least. I wanted to get back at them, no matter what means I had to use. But of course, I was not courageous enough to humiliate them myself, because there would be hell to pay when they find out it was me. I had no friends to talk to, so I always shared my concerns with my parents, who were supportive, but couldn't do much to help me. It was kind of my only outlet of my problems. There was this old man in my town named John, who tried to chat with me multiple times before, that I ignored because my parents told me that he was a creepy guy and had rumors surrounding around him. One day at sunset, when I was going back home after a hectic day at school, bullying and all, I saw John. He was my neighbor now and moved almost right next to my house. At some point, I fell asleep because of exhaustion. When I woke up the next day, I woke up in the middle of the woods. I had no idea how I got there and what was happening. There was already sunlight in the woods. If I had to guess the time, I'd say it was like 8 a.m. or somewhere around that. Thankfully, I wasn't that far into the forest, so I knew my way back home. I went back home as soon as I could. My parents were worried sick about me. I told them the whole story about John and the deal I'd made with him, and also what happened the previous night. My dad had a serious expression on his face and gestured to me to come with him. When my mom was out of earshot, he told me everything about the old man. Apparently, John wasn't originally from our village. He was originally a good man with a good background. He was better off than most men. He had his whole life in order. Until he met Zinnia, one of the most beautiful women in my village. The old man was young at the time and just hadn't met a woman who he wanted to marry. He called out to me twice, and this time, instead of ignoring him and walking away, I went to him. He asked me how school was and told me that he was a friend of my grandfather. When he first saw Zinnia, it was like love at first sight. Zinnia visited his village a lot, so the locals were very familiar with her. She was very kind and friendly with everyone, and everyone adored her. She was particularly close with him and his friends. He decided to propose to her one day. When he finally proposed to her, she rejected him coldly, telling him that he violated their platonic relationship and cut off ties with him completely. He was obviously devastated by this. Not too long after his proposal, he found out that she was engaged to another man in his village named Thomas. His sadness turned into rage and jealousy. Thomas was a kind soul to everyone, on top of being wealthy, and helped out at the community at every chance he got. John was one of his closest friends, so he knew that quite a few women wanted to marry Thomas. When John heard that Thomas and Zinnia were engaged, he was filled with jealousy. He would trash talk Thomas behind his back and was known for his jealousy over Thomas and Zinnia. From here on, he went through a dark path, pursuing revenge against Zinnia and to break them up. We had pretty much a normal conversation that a normal old man and a kid would have had. He would end up doing demonic rituals to curse Zinnia and Thomas. And it seemed like it succeeded, because after their marriage, Zinnia miscarried 3 children in a row. And Thomas would fall ill frequently and wouldn't be able to work. They went to see a lot of doctors in the capital city, which had the most advanced medical care. But none of them knew what was going on with Zinnia nor Thomas. It was like they were cursed. The townspeople were superstitious, so they knew that someone had cursed Zinnia and Thomas. Zinnia got pregnant for her 4th child. At first, everything went very well for her, and she was happy. Thomas had gotten sick in a while as well, so he was excited to see his child and wished that this child, unlike the previous 3, would survive. But not too long after, Zinnia fell incredibly sick. She would pass out randomly and would stiffen up while standing, like a statue of sorts. When she delivered the baby, she died. The baby was deformed and dead. This obviously devastated Thomas and made him suffer quite a bit. He started talking to me about his adventures and experiences. As a 13-year-old kid, I was fascinated by the tales he told and wanted to hear more. His problem of frequently falling sick didn't go away. After doing the ritual, John would go out and do very questionable acts in the village, harassing people and sometimes even assaulting them. He was a growing thorn in the village, and everyone thought that he was crazy. At that point, everyone knew that he was the one who cursed Zinnia and Thomas. The rumor was that he was doing questionable acts to please the demons. And he finally broke the final straw when he assaulted a local woman, which resulted him being arrested and kicked out from his village. Years later, after his release, he came to my village to live here. Even though this story was a little too inappropriate to tell a 13-year-old, my dad believed that it was important that I learn the truth about John. He told me that he was glad I wasn't beaten or assaulted by him. I finally understood why my parents forbade me to go to him. I had no idea that he was this evil. The encounters I had were getting worse as time passed. I would see the strange, bug-eyed creature outside. And oftentimes, as soon as I would see the creature, I would faint and wake up in the woods. This got so out of hand that my parents hired exorcists to investigate what was happening. One of them was a guy whose name was Jake. I couldn't understand why people avoided him. He stayed in the guest room of our house for a while to investigate what was happening to me. Throughout the time that Jake had stayed, nothing happened. It was completely normal. Jake and his group of exorcists couldn't figure out what was happening, and they told my parents that there was nothing wrong with me nor the house. A few nights after Jake and his gang left, I had a dream. There was this white space that stretched to the ends of the horizon, and in the middle of it, right in front of me, the bug-eyed creature stood. This was the first time I saw it so clearly. It had very thin arms and legs that didn't make any sense for the size of its head. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. The creature grinned ear to ear and started talking in a voice that didn't belong to a human. I couldn't remember much of what it was saying, but I do remember it telling me that it would curse Tom and others in return for my body. I woke up in the morning. This dream of mine made me very uneasy. Even though I convinced myself that it was not tied to reality, there was always a sense of unease inside me. Ever since that dream, or should I call it nightmare, I would randomly black out and wake up in the woods. And it happened at random times during both the day and the night. As I grew up, it got worse. To me, he was just like any other normal person who had his fair share of adventures. After this little encounter, I made it a habit to visit him whenever I had any free time on my hands. I started blacking out for long hours and waking up at random places. People would look at me like I was crazy. I knew that these blackouts weren't normal. I knew that I was somehow moving from one place to another during these blackouts. Like as if I was possessed. When I was 16, I was locked up in my house because of my violent outbursts. which I had no recollection of. No one wanted to interact with me, not even my parents. My parents had been trying to get exorcists for 3 years and had not been able to get anyone to successfully get rid of whatever it was that was possessing me at random times. But they did not give up. One night, around midnight, I heard some commotion outside following a loud sound. Like a motorcycle crashing into something. There were PPL screaming, so I knew that something bad had happened. After the commotion died down within a few minutes, I heard my parents saying something about Tom, though I didn't know exactly what they were talking about. The next morning, the exorcist came into my room to examine me. He did these strange motions with his hands, which made me black out a few times. And then, he told me the most chilling thing I've ever heard my whole life. He asked me if there was something strange or wrong with John when he offered me the deal to me regarding Tom. I had heard many of his adventurous stories, like the time he was almost eaten by sharks, how he was almost struck by lightning in a stormy day when he was out on sea. I told him that Tom had a strange look when he offered me the deal. After hearing my answer, he told me that it wasn't John talking, it was the creature. He identified it as a vengeful spirit that takes advantage of people's negative feelings towards others to offer them deals, and take over their bodies the minute they agree to the deal. He also told me that I can't get rid of it, and that the blackouts will happen till the day I die, or when it transfers to someone else. Otherwise, there would be nothing I can do. As for the ones who I cursed, that is, Tom and his friends, they will keep experiencing paranormal activities and accidents till they die. I was, of course, devastated to hear that. And my parents were as well. They told me that Tom had a brutal accident on the previous night and was taken to the city to have his leg amputated. Because of me, Tom would not be able to walk again normally. Fast forward to today, I'm 32 years old now, and because of me getting possessed by this vengeful spirit or whatever, I was never able to get a job. And I am still kept in my room by my parents, only opening the door unless they really need to. To this day, I regret making the deal with John. I wanted to be like him when I grew up, and for a while, even though I got bullied at school nearly every day by Tom and his friends, I started to sort of forget the bullying whenever I was with the old man. I thought that if I became a man like him, I would finally be seen as one of the cool kids, and Tom and his friends would finally stop bullying me. Even though I was trying to keep myself out of trouble by ignoring Tom and his friends, the bullying was escalating as time passed. They started doing dangerous things, like throwing sharp objects like scissors at me. One day, as I was doing some schoolwork during a free period, Tom took my notebook away from me and waved it around as I struggled to get it back from him. Two of his friends held me back as he tore my notebook to pieces and put it all in the bin. Everyone in the class laughed at me, boys and girls alike. At that moment, I wanted to hurt them. I wanted to get back at all of them somehow. And that day, when I was on my way back home, I saw John again. He gestured for me to come to him and took me into his house. For some reason, I felt tense. It was like he had a different energy. Like he was not the old man I knew. "What happened, kid? You look sad," the old man asked me with a serious look on his face. I hesitated to tell him anything because I rarely talked about getting bullied. After a long silence, he came closer to me, the rage visible in his face. I said, "What happened, kid?" He asked me again. I hesitated again, but after taking a moment to think it through, I laid down the whole story of what happened that day, along with the story of how Tom and his friends would constantly bully me. John did not say anything until I finished the story. As soon as I finished the story, John's expression turned more serious. "Do you want to get back at them? Do you want to get them to stop?" John asked, his voice sounding more deeper than before. Yes, I want them to stop. I want to put them through the humiliation they put me through. I said, feeling all the rage in the world. I'll do it for you, but you have to do something for me in return, John said, with a smile on his face. What is it? I asked. I'll let you know when the time comes. For now, just tell me if you agree to my terms, John said. Yes, I said, being creeped out by how he was acting. Consider it done. They will regret bullying you, John said in his unnaturally deep voice. At that point, I could not take it anymore. His energy was making me very uncomfortable, so I told him that I didn't feel well and went back home. I couldn't stop thinking about the energy he had when he talked that day. It was like I never knew him. I did not see this side of him throughout the whole time I had been spending time with him. I put a little distance between us and stopped going to see him. My parents still didn't know that I was seeing John the whole time. And it wasn't too long until they came to know about it. The first time my dad heard about it, he grounded me for weeks. He told me to never speak to the old man ever again. I would hear my dad yelling at John every now and then. I thought I finally understood why people avoided him. And I was convinced that he was going to do something to me now that I wasn't going to see him anymore. That terrified me more than anything. I also noticed that Tom and his friends would skip school on some days. So I was finally able to get some breathing room at the school without getting bullied. And even when they came to school after weeks later, they would just stay quiet in class and follow the lessons closely. This was very odd behavior, because I knew that Tom and his friends were the delinquent types who liked to have fun more than anything else. I did not know what happened to them, and I was too happy that the bullying was finally gone. But little did I know at the time that the real problem was just beginning. At first, Tom and his friends frequently got sick. Headaches, stomach aches, chest aches. They were forced to stay in their homes because the pain they experienced was so excruciating. Their parents were worried that they might have gotten some medical issues. These are all stories I heard from my parents about Tom and his friends. I wondered if I actually cursed them by making the deal with the old man. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. At the same time, I was afraid as well, because sooner or later, the old man will come to collect the debt I owed him. From the bottom of my heart, I prayed that John forget about the favor that I had owed him. A few days passed without any incident. Whenever I saw John, I ignored him. He would sometimes call me, but I would not even look at him. And within a week or two of me not talking to the old man, he was arrested for harassing another little kid. I could finally see why my parents told me to stay away from him. I was finally happy that he was put behind bars. He could no longer reach me, even if he wanted to. As for Tom and his friends, they kept having strange accidents, like mysterious forces pushing them when they were climbing trees, mysterious forces pushing them when they were riding bicycles, seeing strange figures and shadows, etc. They were the talk of not only my class, but the whole school itself. Though some people called it fake, others believed it completely. There were a good chunk of kids who thought that Tom and his friends were cursed because of them bullying others. Yes, there were other victims of their bullying. They bullied the shy type of kids frequently, and a lot of the kids at school believed that the victims all got together and did a cursed ritual of some sort to make Tom and his friends suffer. So obviously, the victim's reputation at the school got sunken pretty low, as if it wasn't low already. So no one wanted to stay within 100 feet of the victims because of the unfair thing we did to them, even though this only happened because of me. They had no way of knowing that it was me, though. By now, you're probably wondering why so many of my schoolmates and classmates believed the whole curse thing. Well, that is because there were a lot of incidents like this that happened throughout not only our town, but the whole country. I did not get bothered by the fact that I was left alone, though. In fact, I was relieved that no one was bullying me anymore. I'd be lying if I told you I wouldn't think of the old man. I'd think of him every once in a while, like what would have happened if he wasn't arrested. Just thinking about it filled me with dread. It wasn't long before I heard some shocking news. Gary, one of Tom's closest friends, drowned in the sea. He was one of my school's best swimmers, so it didn't make sense. And that wasn't even the shocking part. Gary was apparently being pulled underwater by some unknown force, and people who jumped in to save him were unable to reach him because of some mysterious current or something. And he apparently frequently yelled at something to let go of him as he struggled to battle his life. When I heard this story in school, I was overcome by a strange feeling. I felt responsible for it. I had many questions that needed to be answered. Who exactly was the old man? Did it happen because I made the deal with him? I spent the rest of the day deeply thinking about it. Fast forward to night, as soon as I fell asleep, a scary figure appeared in my mind that jolted me awake. I couldn't remember what it looked like, but all I knew is that it was scary. I heard a knocking sound on my door. I wondered who it was since it was midnight and everyone was asleep. The knocking got louder and louder as time passed. I wasn't surprised that it didn't wake up my parents and siblings, who were sleeping. They were heavy sleepers after all. So I went up to the door and opened it. There was no one in sight. I checked my whole yard, but no one was there. So I gave up and went back into the house. As soon as I closed the door behind me, the knocking started again. This time, I opened it immediately, but there was no one there. That really spooked me, in addition to my nightmare. I knew that something was very wrong with this. I couldn't sleep well that night and had a headache the next day. So I told my mother that I couldn't go to school because of my headache. She let me take the day off at school. I told her everything that happened the previous night. She listened to me till I finished the whole story and told me that I was probably imagining it. She dismissed it as a trick of mind, but I know what I heard. I didn't argue with her that long, though. Fast forward to the night, I was home alone, sleeping. My parents had to go watch my grandpa because he was very sick. I woke up from my sleep to knocking on my door again. This time, I was too afraid to go to open the door and kind of just stayed awake, completely frozen as to what to do. I looked at the time. It was past 3 a.m., and the knocking sounds didn't stop. I covered my ears, but that didn't help at all. It continued for nearly an hour. It really shook me up, and at some point it suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room. I went up to the door and opened it. As expected, no one was in sight. When I went back to my bed to sleep again, I heard a whisper calling my name. The voice was unusually low. I turned to the direction where the whisper came from. There was nothing. I was beyond spooked and couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I didn't go to school because I had a massive headache again. A few days after that, I was struggling to go to sleep again. The knocks on the door were louder than ever. This time, my parents were there. I found it strange how they were sound asleep, even though the sound was so loud. I shook my dad, who was asleep. "Dad, wake up," I said with my utterly frightened tone. "What is it?" he asked. "Someone's knocking on the door," I answered. After listening for a while, my dad raised his eyebrows. "I don't hear anything," he said to me. The whole time he was listening, the knocks on the door did not stop at all. It was as loud as ever. "It's just your imagination. Just go back to sleep," he told me. With that, he went back to sleep. I was genuinely both scared and confused. Why was I the only one who could hear the knocks on the door? Was I just imagining it? No, it was too loud to be just an imagination. I lay on my bed, trying to sleep. The knocks didn't stop until a few minutes later. It was unbearable. My ears finally felt relieved after the knocking stopped. I suddenly felt so thirsty that it was like my throat had completely dried up. Obviously, I was too scared to go outside, where our water container was. But my throat was so dry that I didn't have a choice. So I went outside and took some water from the water container. As I was drinking the water, I saw a dark figure hiding behind a tree in my yard, with an unusually large eye. Only one eye was visible, since the other half was hidden behind the tree. I instantly could tell that it wasn't human. I almost choked on my water and immediately ran back into my house. I was shaking uncontrollably, unable to fall asleep. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how unusually large those eyes were, and how it was the only feature on the thing's face.